Good morning. I feel like a locomotive in the station. I'm all steamed up. Get ready. I want to say first how awed I am by this wonderful, wonderful conference and each of you who have showed up. It's just awesome. And I want to express our thanks to Stephen and to Elizabeth for organizing this and getting us all together. Let's start with that. No matter what we say here, I think what is vitally important is that we recognize that this is an organization event. I hope that we get together from now on and that we each work in our own way and communicate with one another, because it's going to take organization to bring about the changes that we envision. I've been to a lot of academic conferences, and I'll tell you they've been very unsatisfying because they're scattered all over the place. And it seems that people want to talk about things, but they don't stand for anything. We stand for something very important, something beneficial to all people. And I love the logo of the American Monetary Institute, the AMI. It means friend. It's based on the Latin word for love, amo. And it's a user-friendly organization. And what we want to do is act in ways that are beneficial to all people throughout the world. I want to dedicate my work and my statement today to my son Benjamin. He died in an automobile accident in 1999. He was 18 years old. So I give voice for him. I want also to share with you a poem that Ben wrote that we found only this last May. So it's been almost 6 years since he was killed, but we found this poem. And I think it's apt for us to hear here because, well, I'll say it and you judge the relevance of it. It is called Eternity. Eternity is a secret we all hold inside. Eternity is good. Eternity is evil. Eternity is as short or as long as we make it. Eternity is now. Eternity is forever. I am eternity. You are eternity. We are eternity. I want to emphasize what Dick just mentioned about the materials that are in the back of the room. Every one of us who brought those materials would like to go home empty-handed, including the ones for sale. There's a lot of material that is free back there, including a proposal that I'm sending to the United Nations to do what we want the United States to do. Which is to create money to help support production in less developed countries so that we can achieve the Millennium Development Goals that are so difficult to achieve because of a lack of finance. The UN is organized like the Articles of Confederation, and it is quite weak, and you will hear about an alternative to that from one of your speakers that I know of. I really know several people in this audience, and I love you all, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the people that I haven't met before as well. I'm going to just give you a piece of the whole scenario. I think basically we're talking about a fundamental paradigm shift. We should take nothing for granted. We should examine all of our concepts. I've heard GDP mentioned. I've heard inflation mentioned. We need to re-examine those concepts, and I hope in the question period that you will raise questions about what I'm going to present. So let me begin. The root of U.S. debt. The root was in 1790. This is from a speech by James Jackson, the first congressman from Georgia, speaking on February 9th, 1790, in response to Alexander Hamilton's plan to put us into a debt money system. I have that speech available back in the back of the room for you. It's a wonderful speech. I'm only going to choose a little bit of it here. Let us take warning by the errors of Europe and guard against the introduction of a system accompanied by calamities so general. Though our present debt may be but a few millions, in the course of a single century, it may be multiplied to an extent we dare not think of. Right on. He knew this was a mistake, and he quotes experiences in several European areas, Venice, Genoa, Spain, France, England, all of which had experienced this escalation, this exponential growth in debt. And he said, don't do it. And here is a letter to the editor that appeared in the newspapers at the time. Such injustice and oppression may be colored over with fine words, but there is a time coming when the pen of history shall detect and expose the folly of the arguments in favor of the proposed system, as well as the iniquity, not inequity, iniquity. James Callender, reporter for the Philadelphia Gazette, wrote, "The funding law was passed through Congress by the influence of a majority who purchased certificates from the Army at undervalue and who voted for the law with the single view of enriching themselves." Corruption at the root. Corruption is when you act to benefit yourself and it harms others. Hamilton's plan: pay up to 6% interest on the debt certificates until the debt is paid. Authorize the incorporation of a bank whose stock could be purchased with the debt certificates, which would then serve as reserves against which the bank would lend its own banknotes into circulation. The pen of history. Until 1916, only federal debt is recorded until the founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913. Under President Andrew Jackson, I don't know if he's any relation to James Jackson, I'd like to find out. Federal debt is reduced by 1835 to $33,733. That's not millions. That's $33,000. So there was this anti-bank issue of money and pay off the debt. And we still hear people saying, pay off the debt, pay off the debt. In 1837, there was a severe depression. It's just what people are saying. If the federal government were to pay off its debt and everybody was to pay off their debts, there'd be no money in circulation. They paid off federal debt, and they had a severe depression. One writer describes the situation: all the money was in the banks, but none of it was in circulation. So we see repeated efforts to reduce federal debt, that up and down thing that we're seeing in the graph. The Civil War, one could argue that the Civil War was caused by the lack of money, by a shortage of money, which caused great distress. We talk about the Stamp Act being one of the reasons for the revolution, but there was also the denial of the colonies the right to create their own money, which created a severe money shortage. So we get this increase for war, and then they try to pay it off afterwards because they're all thinking we got to pay it off, but it causes more economic distress, and once again they have to raise the debt. Conclusion so far: whenever federal debt was reduced, people suffered money shortages. Increases in federal debt increased the money supply. Strange that economists warn that increases in federal debt reduce the money available to others, thereby driving up interest rates. You've all heard that argument. Oh, this deficit is bad because it's going to drive up interest rates. But that's not what actually happens. So total debt from 1916 to 2003. Total debt includes the debts of federal, state, and local governments, corporations, farmers, home mortgages, and consumer, commercial, and financial debt. This research was published in the International Social Science Journal, which is under the auspices of UNESCO. It did not get published in the United States, although I tried to get it published in numerous places. And it's updated in the article revisiting the forecasts or predictions or projections, I guess is the correct term, that I made in that research is in an article in the back. I show you what happened from 1916 to 1939 because this growth in debt is lost when we look at future debt. But you see here a very dramatic increase in debt. And this is a period of economic growth and prosperity. The Roaring Twenties is what it's known as for us. And then in the period of the General Depression, I call it the General Depression, not the Great Depression, because I think what made it significant was it affected a lot of people. Not that it was a big depression, it was general. A lot of people affected. That's what allowed us to confront it for what it was. The failures were not individual failures, they were system failures. And we responded appropriately rather than blaming the victim. And that's what we need to do now and really forever. But what you see during the General Depression is the failure of debt to increase. The failure of debt. You see this more clearly in the next graph. There you see debt from 1916 to 59. Debt stops growing during the Depression, and then during World War II, it increases to what appears to be where it would have been had it stopped growing. So it suggests an underlying imperative driving debt. And then we had the prosperous period, the post-war period, with debt, total debt, increasing. So there's something odd about this. Debt is increasing in a period of prosperity when you would think, intuitively, that you would be paying off debt during a period of prosperity. When else would you be paying off debt? Total debt to 1989, now you see how the debt at this point has dwarfed any increase prior to that time. It is skyrocketing. And this is the projection from 1989 to the year 2003, where it goes from 17 trillion to 45 trillion. There was a figure of 25 trillion earlier, and and in a way, it doesn't matter whether it's 25 trillion or 45 trillion. It depends on the technology that you use, the assumptions that you use. The fundamental thing is this thing is out of control. There's something going on that needs to be addressed. When we put this material on a logarithm scale, what we get is almost a straight line. What that tells us is that this is a growth process at a constant rate. If we then take the federal debt in 1790 and increase it at the rate of about 6% annually, it intersects the growth of debt from 1916 to the year 2000, almost 2003, almost perfectly, which is to say, the root was in 1790. And what we are seeing now is a process that is continuing because it's built in to the money system. It must increase. There is a debt imperative. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago in 1963, where they're saying, most of us think that you're supposed to pay off your debt when you're prosperous and you go into debt when you're having a hard time. Well, they then acknowledge that that's not happening with the government or with the economy as a whole. Instead, periods of prosperity have been times of rapid increase in overall indebtedness, and periods of severe depression have been accompanied by debt reduction. No money for interest. When I first realized that this was the case, I thought I had discovered something. And I remember calling someone, I think it was a farmer out west somewhere, and he said, we already know that. Yes, it turns out people have known this for a long time. At that time, I have no idea about James Jackson. They knew it back then. So just to show the mathematics in a simple way, in 1790, the total money rented, which is what we're talking about, we're talking about debt money, we're renting it instead of owning it, was $75 million. At 6%, the total money owed would be $79.5 million. We owed more than we had, or that the debt created. So the shortage is made up by more debt. They had to borrow to make up the difference. So in 1791, the total money rented is $79.5 million. At 6%, the total money owed is $84.3 million. If you follow that mathematics, you get contemporary debt. It has been growing at an exponential rate because of the way in which the money supply was created, and it was known at the time, which is a lesson for us that you can be in Congress, you can want to change it, but you got to have the votes, at least at that level. There's a lot to do that requires organization. The total debt in 2003, $45 trillion. That's what it looks like, but that's just the debt. They never tell us about the interest owed on it. You can calculate that. The United States population is a little fewer than 300 million people, so if you calculate per capita debt, it's $150,000 per person. So you might think you're out of debt. However, and this isn't just the federal government, it's the state governments, it's the city governments. It's a huge, huge problem. And this assumes that the debt is distributed equally to everyone. That's not the case. What I have here is a T account which shows the basic United States debt banking system. And we can count as assets of the banking system, which is claims on the debtors, $50 trillion, but I've put that compound interest formula following it because obviously if we don't pay it, it's going to continue to grow at that exponential or explosive rate. And its liabilities of the banking system are to creditors, are to people who regard the debt not as debt at all, but as wealth. So what this debt money system has done is to create a situation in which we have divided the society in a very fundamental way, where a lot of people believe that they are, I will say, filthy rich, many of whom have never had to work a day in their life and never will, or at least they hope they never will. And then there's other people who don't have enough to pay their grocery bills or their rent. And we're going to hear more about that, I think, from the next speaker. If half own and half owe, which is really generous because probably the people who own is a lot smaller percentage than half, then the per capita owed and owned is $300,000. So those who are the debtors owe a great deal more. It's a very unsustainable situation. So I would like to suggest what a proper government accounting system might look like. The first step to a cure, and I think we all need to realize it is a first step. Oh, technology. Do what the first Congress should have done. Congress, issue the money. Words again. Author it, also known as authorize. It's a note. Write it out. Stephen likes to talk about the magic checkbook. Yes, write the check to people who produce public goods and services. Therefore, no debt, no interest. The money's paid into circulation. Hallelujah. Here's what the accounting system would look like at the national level. The U.S. Treasury system, the buck starts here. On the treasure side, we list everything of real value that is produced by the government issuing the money. This we could also call the capital account. Interstate road, river, and rail transportation, facilities for clean water, air, and resource use, and a competent and healthy population. Those are our goals. Those are the real treasures. It's not gold. It's not money. It's the things that make our lives good. On the liability side, normally thought of, instead we think of it as labor mobilized. That's what money does. That's why the introduction of more money, as Bill suggested, leading to increased production. Yes, supply side is backwards. We need demand side. The same thing with less developed countries. Create the money, pay people to do things that need to be done. And then you create the infrastructure that is necessary. Now, what is sufficient money? I hope you have questions about this. The first criterion is full employment. Full employment. It's about time. At average wages, what is an average wage? You take gross domestic price. You've been talking about GDP, gross domestic product. It's got the wrong name. It's gross domestic price. Challenge everything. Take nothing for granted. Gross domestic price. The GDP is the cost of what we are producing. And encouraging the increase of GDP into infinity is to ask to be destroyed. Is to ask to destroy the foundations of our life environmentally, in every way. When you recognize it for what it is, price, the goal is to reduce the price, reduce the GDP. There's so much overproduction in the United States. All you have to do is look at those landfills, euphemistically called landfills. They're mountains. And all the stuff you see in Walmart and these other places is basically headed for the landfill. I tell my wife sometimes, why don't you just throw it in the trash when you get home with it? So if we take the gross domestic price and we divide it by the hours worked to produce it, for the year 2004, you'd get $40 an hour. You know what? I'm just about done because I want you folks to ask me questions. $40 an hour would be the average wage that would be paid under this system. Now, whatever system, see, the question of quantity of money to produce, there's a lot still of this hydraulic mentality. You know, it's like we got some kind of a plumbing system going, and we're watching the macro numbers, and if there's a shortage of money somewhere, we're going to plug in some more, and if there's too much, we're going to drain it out. We need to think of it in terms of a standard of price, not value, a standard of price, and then to pay people a good wage. This would be the average wage based upon the total level of production. In other words, we use a rule to decide how much additional money is necessary. The rules here are full employment is the goal, therefore we mobilize where there is unemployment, and we use the existing pie, the GDP, as something to divide to tell us what our current price level is. Now I want to just mention, there's the next slide, but I'm not going to show you. I'm just going to tell you what it says because I think it's important to recognize what this does not address. I'll take a chance I'll be able to back up to this one. The continued explosion of existing debt. A huge problem. If the government began today to produce money, we would still have that existing debt accelerating. And the question of the plutocratic consequences of paying off the debt. If we just pay it, what do? Basically, we transfer the wealth. We validate the wealth that people believe they now have a claim to. So we have to address those problems. Thank you.
Hello, Bob. Just two questions.
Yes.
One is, do you think that perhaps the reason that debt goes down during times of economic recession or depression is because there are so many bankruptcies that wipe it off the books? And then my second question is, when are you going to give this briefing to a congressional committee? Because they really are the ones who need to hear it. Thank you.
Certainly, you see, bankruptcies pose a very serious problem because the people who are claiming the wealth, who think that they're so rich because they have these numbers in their bank accounts on the asset side, are losing the validation of those claims under bankruptcy. So they want a solution. So I think debt does go down because of bankruptcies. It is inevitable that we have bankruptcies. People cannot continue. You know, the advice that, you remember 9/11, you remember the advice they gave us? What to do? Go shopping. I mean, that is insane. As Bill said, it's idiotic. What kind of a system do we live in that requires us to deal with the loss of thousands of people in a terrible event by going shopping? Bad. When am I going to say this to Congress? You know, I am retired. I believe that to mean I have new treads, new tires. And I'm delighted to see Bill here and Bill here still plugging at it, because that's what we have to do. And the younger people here, that is wonderful. You know, I do truly believe eternity is now. We do not have forever to get this done. Nothing ever happened in the past. Nothing ever happened in the future. It only happened in the now. And that's what we have to do. And I would be delighted to speak to any groups, to do workshops and presentations, including Congress. I hope that happens. We have a wonderful connection to Congress here. And as you will hear Dennis Kucinich, and his wife is Elizabeth Harper Kucinich, who is a wonderful woman. I know that, having met her this summer and spent some time with her. I think we have a great opportunity here. Yes.
I just have two comments. The first is regard to the debt imperative. I think the problem there, as we see in a period of prosperity, there was an increase in indebtedness. A lot of times it has to do with how we're defining prosperity. The second thing I want to do is address the issue of what was not being addressed. The fact that if we were to employ the suggestions here, we still will have this ongoing debt. I would like to propose that we reenact the policy of Jubilee.
That would be great, but you know, I believe we need to put an objective indicator on all of our money numbers, which is we need to convert them all to work time. It's like flying in an airplane with no altimeter, or an altimeter that has no numbers on it. It's just a dial kind of jumping around. And what we do is we say, well, look out the window and see what the other planes are doing. I would never fly in such a plane, and nor would you. I remember going to a conference in St. Louis about the euro when it first came out, and there were a group of economists there talking about it, and I turned to one of them and I said, if these were pilots of an airplane, would you get on the plane? He said, no. So we need to know where we are by, put it all into man hours, forgive me, ladies, but you know what I mean. The other thing, I just read this in another book. It's amazing how many people have discovered all of these things quite independently. I think the most important thing we need to do, this is from Herman Daly, is to put a limit at the top. It's easy for us to talk about the bottom, but we never talk about the top. That's why I hope somebody asks me about that $40 an hour. But I wait for a question.
Hi. My question isn't about the $40 an hour, but it's along the lines of where you're going in terms of putting a cap at the top. And I wondered if you saw a possibility in that column, labor mobilized, for something along the lines of our liabilities to nature or ecological services, and what that could look like.
I think there's some things that money cannot and should not be used to make judgments about, and that is value. We should not use money to judge value. That's one of those confounded concepts. They put price with value, and it destroys the meaning of price and of value. Price is what things cost. And when we talk about money, we're talking about a human relationship to each other. We receive money when we're doing something for another person. and then we convey that money to a third party as evidence that we deserve to be paid in real goods and services. So I would limit the use of money thinking about human relationships, achieving reciprocity in human relationships. When we think about the environment, we have to make those judgments qualitatively. We have to use our senses and to recognize the realities of the resources, the rates of their consumption. You know, Bucky Fuller used to say that we're using our savings account with all of these fossil fuels. We should be using our current income. Our current income is from the sun, and there's a few other sources of energy, but that's the main one. We need to be sensible about just like when we judge well-being, we should not judge well-being by money. We should judge well-being by food, clothing, housing, medical care. And of course, money is the way we share those responsibilities and benefits with each other. So I think the sensitivity to the environment is essential to our own survival, and the more of it, the better. But let's do it on its own terms.
In your opinion, when will the debt get so big that just the interest alone will exceed the total consumer income?
You know, it seems like it doesn't matter. It just keeps going up and up and up. What will happen is it's going to get so difficult for people to accept those debts that they're going to stop. And I don't know when that's going to happen. But you see with the housing, to keep our economy prosperous, housing costs should go, I mean, you should be able to, or you should have to pay $1 million for a house. You want prosperity? Throw away your car, go buy one for $50,000. Now, how long are we going to do that? That is nuts. People in the United States, many people in the United States already have far too much. You know, it's stuffing the closets, it's filling the storage bins, people are giving it away at yard sales. We're already beyond reason. The only way to sustain this system is to keep going into debt. They're saying Bush is looking for $1 trillion deficit. Well, that's consistent with the need of the haves and have-mores, as he put it, because that's going to accrue to them. You know, when you give them a tax break, you know what they do with the money? They buy treasury securities. So instead of paying taxes, they rent us the money. Isn't that wonderful? For them. Yes. I think, Lucien, the microphone is right behind you. Oh, okay. You want to?
You fingered something extremely important, but could you help us get our heads around the question? You mentioned exponential growth. Many economists use exponential growth as a synonym for compound interest, and they are not the same. The analogy of Jesus Christ, if at Jesus Christ's birth a penny had been put in a bank, it wouldn't go bust. By now, Jesus Christ would have, I don't know how many billions, but it's irrelevant, more gold than is in the planet. That is compound interest. If derivatives were used, exponential growth, it would have taken as long as it took Hiroshima to blow up.
Well,
exponential growth means that the rate of growth and the rate of growth to the second, third, fourth, fifth degree increase as the expression itself does. And how is that brought into the economic? Let me suggest, and perhaps you will expand on this. It is brought into the economy as follows: by assuming that the rate of growth of profit achieved in the past, real or imagined, is expanded until all time That's what happened when they were using the share of market of internet companies in 2000, up to 2000, that
Yeah.
went into the big bust.
Yeah.
Now-
Let me take that in a little different direction. There's a basic rule of mathematics, and that is the math that you choose to use has to conform to the reality you're attempting to describe with that mathematics. And we have allowed that separation so that we're talking exponential as if that can in fact happen. Well, all growth processes do have an exponential period of growth, but then they must reach their limit, their stage of maturity. And we need to have the same thing happen with our economy. Let's stop. The notion of exponential interest cons a lot of people into thinking they're going to get rich if they can just buy mutual funds or put money in a bank in their 401k or something of that sort. We are playing to people's greed. What we need to do is have us recognize that we're in this together. We are social beings. What hurts one hurts another. We're in it together. Let's work together. Christianity's all about that. Love your neighbor, love one another. And it's a struggle that all good people have had throughout history. To do good to one another, because it is not only in my interest to do that, but it's in your interest, it is in our interest. And that's what we need to do. I think Lucien had a question.
I hope it's related to what you are saying, but in terms of the debts, how debts influence our relationship with foreign countries or foreign nations? And how much of what we owe is owed to them? And how much do they owe us?
I can't answer your direct question, which is how much debt we owe them. It is huge. But what I want to draw your attention to is the importance of currency exchange rates. They're off the radar for a lot of Americans because we have a big economy and we hardly ever exchange currencies. But that is the secret of exploitation of developed countries, of underdeveloped countries. We had a wonderful opportunity in the founding of the International Monetary Fund, and if you want to read a great speech, read the introductory statement that was prepared and presented in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's place at the founding of Bretton Woods, the opening of the conference. It is a beautiful statement about the importance of making decisions at that conference that would be beneficial to future generations, to all people. We had learned to work together in time of war. This would be a test of our ability to work in time of peace. Well, we abused our power in the founding of the IMF. It was like New York taking over the Constitutional Convention and making sure that New York would remain in control, which I think to some extent they did. England was part of that through the quota system. And we have established exchange rates that hurt us really, but it looks in the short term like they're beneficial because we can buy stuff like from China and we owe tremendous amounts. Somebody said the other day, when we're talking about rebuilding New Orleans, let's say it for what it is. We're going to borrow the money from China to rebuild New Orleans, and where is that going to put us? You can take over a country not only by sending in an invading army. It's much better to send in a currency and take control of that country that way.
Bob, I wanted to just ask you to define full employment. For many years, the economists in the United States have defined full employment as 6% unemployment, and I'm wondering if you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, isn't that absurd? 6% unemployment is full employment. I want that word back. Full means full. That means everybody's working at a job they want to work at. That's part of this paradigm shift I'm talking about. We have to take back our language and our thinking and our understanding. As Hegel said so many years ago, 200 years ago, we need words to understand and to live and to communicate. But those words become barriers to our own understanding. And that's what's happened here. Full employment means everybody who wants to work has got a job doing a good thing somewhere in the world for somebody. It's not 6% unemployment. say that to somebody who's unemployed. There's full employment. Oh, you're unemployed? Oh, well, we're still having, no. Let's be honest here. Let's stop telling lies about what's going on here.
I'm going to ask you one more question about $40 per hour because you haven't had that opportunity. Right now, I don't know how you calculate that, but you can explain that too if you wish. But right now, we have this obscene difference where we have people working for $5.15 an hour minimum wage, and we have CEOs making $100 million a year. Is this $40 that average?
You know, that was the question I was hoping for. You know, the average CEO pay this past year was $11 million. And what is ironic about it is whenever they talk about inflation, if you say, let's raise the minimum wage to $6, $10, $15, or let's have the government create money, right away you hear inflation, inflation, inflation. Too much money chasing too few goods. Anybody making $11 million a year, they got too much money chasing too few goods. But why isn't that brought up? That's why I think one of the most essential things we have to do is put a cap on income. It's like you invite people to your home for Thanksgiving. What would you do if one of your guests walked in, picked up everything off the table, and left? We recognize common humanity when it's face to face. We need to recognize the same thing with these salaries and wages. Herman Daly used the figure $100,000 as an annual limit to income, and I loved it because I thought of that same number. It's a reasonable amount, although, you know, Huey Long back in 35 was saying limit income to $5 million a year. And, you know, he got a lot of support, but that's still way too high. The lower, the better.
Thank you so much, Bob, for a tremendous presentation.